Hey, this is Valroth, and that was the last scene of the Elder Scrolls Online cinematic trailer. I've started following this game more closely, and I really like what I'm seeing. I'm going to do something different with this video. It's going to be all about character building in Elder Scrolls Online. This video was inspired by an article I read on Tamriel Foundry, written by Isari. Tamrielfoundry.com is the website. It's a fan site for Elder Scrolls Online. It's the largest one with an active community, and plenty of information and articles posted regularly. So if you're an Elder Scrolls fan and you want to get involved, head over to tamrielfoundry.com. Isari agreed to discuss his article with me, and I'll cut to that in a second here. Firstly, Elder Scrolls Online isn't scheduled for release until spring of 2014, but we already have plenty of information to work with. Even if you've been following the Elder Scrolls Online for a while now and you've seen all the interviews and gameplay footage, you'll still want to pay close attention because there's a lot of information here that you don't get from any of those sources. Once Isari starts talking, information comes thick and fast, so sit up straight, tuck in your napkin, and prepare to get served. Okay, so thanks for being with me, Isari.
Thanks for having me.
Your article on Tamriel Foundry that I read inspired this idea for the video, so you wrote a really good article about builds in Elder Scrolls Online and how they're going to work. You're a contributor at Tamriel Foundry. Do you have any other claims to fame within the Elder Scrolls community?
Not really. This is pretty much where I've staked my claim. I started out on the Reddit subreddit, and I found Tamriel Foundry from there and started posting there, and I don't know, I guess people liked how I was posting, and they made me a moderator, and I've started writing articles, and that's pretty much how that's worked out.
Sounds good. What is it about the Elder Scrolls Online that grabbed your attention to begin with?
Well, the first thing that really grabbed my attention was probably what got most people's attention. Basically, that it's an Elder Scrolls MMO. And at first, I was actually very negative about this. You know, we're all pretty cautious about getting into an MMO after SWTOR, and I was like, oh, it's going to be a WoW clone cash out that's going to, you know, ruin the franchise for me. And then the more I heard, the more I liked it. Just the fact that they've got dock style 3-faction RVR is fantastic. The combat system started sounding completely different, and the more I heard, the more I realized that they were really doing their own thing, and that excited and interested me.
Nice. Yeah, I had a similar experience myself. So a character build is a combination of every resource available to the player at a given time. Could I just get you to explain the major differences in character builds for the Elder Scrolls Online as it compares to other MMOs?
The main difference between the Elder Scrolls Online's character development through build creation and that of the standard MMO formula is that typically games like WoW have given you a large pool of abilities to choose from in the forms of talent trees and a limited number of ability points with which to purchase those abilities. And then they'll give you an unlimited number of action bars, so you're kind of gated by how much you can unlock, not how much you have available to you at any given time. And the Elder Scrolls Online is one of many MMOs that's taking a different path, where they let you unlock everything, but they only give you 5-6 ability slots with which to actually have things with you. So you could say they're more loadout oriented than focusing on a permanent build.
So that's on top of your regular attack. So you've got your left click for a regular attack, and then you've got hold down left click for a power attack.
Well, what you have to create your build with is you have 5 ability slots where you can slot any of the abilities from various sources, which we'll talk about later, and 1 slot for your ultimate ability. Then you can weapon swap, and you get a completely new bar when you do that, so really that doubles those. And then for your weapon abilities, you have your left click, which is a basic attack. You hold it for a power attack, just like Skyrim. Right click blocks, and that's available with any weapon, again, just like Skyrim. And when you block and then left click, that does a bash that actually interrupts. And that, again, is another ability.
I didn't actually know about the block and then left click for an interrupt. It's good to know. So this is already sounding a lot more like Elder Scrolls than a standard MMO.
That's basically the promise they've been making, and it seems to deliver that way from what I've heard from my friends that have played it. The combat is supposed to be paced very similarly and feel a lot like it with, you know, you've got the hot bar. That would probably be the main difference, is that you do have 5 ability slots because you can't pause an MMO, obviously, and then change abilities like you could in Skyrim. So they give you your abilities to access in your bar, and Other than that, it pretty much feels just like it. There's more emphasis on reactive combat, blocking. If you block a power attack from the enemy, it puts them in a down state where they're stunned and more vulnerable to your power attacks, and the same thing happens if you interrupt a charged attack by them. So it feels very tactical, and it's very enjoyable.
Awesome, sounds good. All right, let's move on. Get into some details about these 5 elements you're talking about. So the 5 are abilities, weapons, armor, attributes, and passives. Let's just go over each of these elements and get a feel for how they work. Let's start with abilities.
Abilities are pretty much exactly how they are in other games. You activate them, things happen. But there are some key differences in the design philosophy. ISO has gotten rid of cooldowns altogether, opting to focus entirely on resources as the limiting factor of gameplay, which, in addition, will kind of get rid of the rotation-based gameplay that you've seen in normal MMOs. So it works well. I know a lot of people are skeptical when they hear that, because the abilities are really more focused on utility. You don't have this ability that you would just spam all the time like you would in a cooldown-based game, because it's not part of a rotation. It's not about trying to use that ability optimally, even though that's a gross simplification how it usually works. But, your attack might stun, or it might be a snare. And with the reactive combat, you're focused a lot on your basic attacks more than you'd think. So you won't have a set rotation, and it really emphasizes on reactive combat. The great success of that ability design is it leads you to not having to look at your action bar and not play the UI, which is something the developers have really touted. And it's immersive and visceral, and I think it could be a nice change for the genre. There are skill lines all throughout the game. You can get them from your class, weapon and armor skill lines, Mages Guild, Fighters Guild skill lines, racial skill lines, and world skill lines like Vampirism and Lycanthropy. And those are available to everybody regardless of class, except for the class ones, and racial skill lines are obviously racially restricted as well.
Okay, so you mentioned skill lines and skill trees. Could they be something similar to what we saw in Elder Scrolls Skyrim, where you had perk trees? Are they similar in the way that they work?
I would say they're inspired by that, but they do work a little bit differently. They don't branch, and they're a bit more focused. They call it a skill line because it is more of a line. Abilities can actually be morphed, apparently, several times, where once you've leveled up an ability a certain amount of times, you can change it to have different effects. Maybe you'll add a damage over time component to a ranged attack, or maybe it'll turn into an AoE cone in front of you. And I think that'll just add even more depth and complexity and uniqueness to people's character builds. Like I said, your class abilities are magic consuming, your physical weapon abilities consume stamina, your magical weapons like staves consume magic as well. Ultimates also have an effective cooldown because they use their own resource, which is generated in a skill-based system with finesse, where if you block when you're supposed to and interrupt when you're supposed to, you see or kill multiple mobs at once, you're rewarded with larger gains in finesse, which also actually increases the amount of experience and loot drops that you get from monsters.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. This is the first time I've heard a lot of that stuff.
You won't be seeing the traditional destruction magic, restoration magic. Those aren't what the skill lines are. The class skill lines basically have most of the magic that you would see in the single-player games rolled into them. There's some speculation about that, but you see Dragon Knights. Everybody has destruction because they all have damaging spells, but Dragon Knights, for example, would have alteration skills, like the ones that increase armor to increase their durability. Templars obviously have healing abilities, so that would be restoration. Sorcerers can summon minions and summon bound armor, so conjuration. And this is in addition to the Mages Guild skill line, which will have some other stuff that we don't know the specifics of. We know Mage Light is in there, and at first I thought that would be a useless spell, but we've heard more on the details of stealth and how that'll work similarly to the single-player games, so we'll see Mage Light turning into a stealth reveal ability.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff. I mean, that's really exciting what you're talking about, because it's really bringing everything together for me.
You will want to intelligently set this up. Is there a focus to your abilities? Are you completely focusing on Magicka? Then you probably don't want to put a bunch of two-handed sword abilities on your bar. That type of thing. And I'm sure there will be combos as well. What if you have an ability that increases a mob's weakness to a certain damage type, and then a large expensive attack that of that damage type, and maybe a DPS increasing self buff that you can hit yourself with, and you'll be able to line up intelligent sequences of abilities.
Great, yeah, that sounds really good. Most MMOs limit the equipment a player can use based on class choice. This is something I was pleased to hear about the Elder Scrolls Online, where classes have access to all weapon and armor types. So there's a lot of options there as far as the equipment that you can use, and for somebody who's interested in character building and min-maxing and all that sort of thing, there's a lot of wiggle room and different things that you can do. Could you just go over the different types of weapons in Elder Scrolls Online?
Well, like I said earlier, basically you can split them up into physical, stamina-consuming weapons and magicka-consuming weapons. And for your physical weapons, you have one-handed and shield, dual-wield, two-handed, and bows. And for the first three, you're going to have axes, swords, maces, all of what you would expect there. And for magical weapons, we have destruction staff. There are 3 types of those: fire, ice, and lightning. And then a restoration staff, which is the healing weapon. There are no spears. I know a lot of people are interested in that, but we did have one of our members talk to a developer at PAX that stated that they are planning to continually add skill lines into the game and that spears may be a possibility in the future. No promises though. So each of these weapons have their own skill line attached to it, and from that you'll be able to unlock abilities that you can slot under your bar and passives. All of these abilities obviously cannot be used unless you have that specific weapon equipped. But no other abilities in the game are tied to weapons, it's just those. Now armor, pretty much from your traditional MMO armor types. You have light, which is cloth, medium, which is leather, and heavy, which is exactly what you'd think. I made the distinction for the first two because in the single player games, leather armor was called light and robes weren't considered armor, but it's an MMO and you obviously can't just not give cloth wearers a skill line.
With these bonuses that you get from the armor, are there any details out about what those bonuses might be specifically? Like, for example, with medium armor, giving bonuses to stealth, does that increase your stealth ability just having medium armor on, or does it do other things?
Well, the first thing to think about is really that the 3 armor types tie to the 3 attributes, and that, as I said earlier, everything is resource-centered in this game, so you really see that tying in through the entire build-creating process. Light armor relates to magicka, medium armor relates to stamina, and heavy armor relates to health and tanky abilities. So, with your example of medium armor relating to stealth, stealth is actually consumed stamina in the Elder Scrolls Online. And I'm sure you'll be able to unlock passives as you go down the medium armor skill line that will, give you reduced stealth cost, maybe lower detection radius, increased stamina regen, that type of thing.
So it may not specifically give you stealth bonus just having the medium armor on, but it gives you extra stamina or stamina regen or something like that. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and there may be specific to stealth passives as well. Reduce stealth drain, for example.
Right, yeah. Okay,
or
cool.
and we could see actual stats on medium armor, but we don't know anything about itemization at this point. Stealth increasing stats.
All right, cool. So we got light armor for magicka, medium armor for stamina, and heavy armor for health. Each time you level up, you choose to increase one of these attributes, and it's been confirmed that you can actually respec at some point. If people are worried about committing into an attribute line that they won't use later on, they can always respec, which is nice to know. Is there anything you want to add about attributes in general?
Not really. The attribute system is pretty much your standard fare for both the test games and MMOs, really. You put points into stamina and you have more stamina. But it is worth pointing out, as I said earlier, that the armor types and attributes correlate with light and magicka, medium and stamina, etc., in case that wasn't obvious. It just ties into the ability usage all being resource-driven instead of based around cooldowns and rotation, and that fact can be seen throughout the build-making process.
Alright, so we're up to element number 5, which is passives. Okay, so what details, if any, can you give us about passive skills?
Passives are always on, so they aren't slotted like they are in some games like the Secret World, but they are limited. Your passives that you get from the armor lines will actually scale with how many pieces of that armor type that you have equipped, which is really cool because that actually, I feel, really encourages mixing and matching of armor types. The weapons passives will be, maybe increases two-handed weapon damage by this, or maybe it'll be something more interesting than that, but it'll be tied to a two-handed weapon if it's a two-handed weapon passive. And that's the type of thing you have so that you don't have passives completely overpowering the game. But it's interesting to think about racial passives and class passives that will be always on, and to see how that will affect the build making process later in the game.
It's really interesting because there's just so much to this. I mean, I'm already, my mind's boggling. It's going all different directions, thinking about how I might choose to build a character. So with passives, I just want to follow up on Mundus stones. Now, they give you a passive, and they're much like the standing stones in Skyrim. Is that right?
From what we know of them, yes, they're basically, the signs from Oblivion or the standing stones in Skyrim. But we don't know much else about them. They could be permanent buffs, or they could be temporary. Personally, I prefer for them to be permanent, so that they're, an actual part of your build, instead of just, you run to one before a specific raid encounter because it fits well for that. But it could go up either way, and we don't really know that.
Alright, cool. So we've got the 5 elements down, I think. So we've got abilities, weapons, armor, attributes, and passives. So I want to go ahead now and try to theory craft a build. Now in your article, you put together an example of a build for a melee DPS Nord with some healing ability. So for something different, I'm thinking about possibly a caster melee hybrid with CC spells, so crowd control. I want to have some melee DPS, and I'd like to be able to mix in some stealth if that's possible. From there, what do you think I would start with?
Well, the good news about being a hybrid is that from what we've seen so far, all damage and healing actually in the Elder Scrolls Online scales from the same basic power stat. So you won't have to worry about, splitting your itemization if you're trying to make a build focusing on both magic and melee. As far as where to start, I guess race. And for a caster melee hybrid with stealth, the Dunmer or the Dark Elf seems like a dead giveaway. That's pretty much what they've always been. And we don't know the specifics of what their racial tree will entail yet, but it's fair to assume that it'll probably go along with some of those things.
Is there any specific information yet on race abilities, if they get stat bonuses in certain areas, or no?
Absolutely not. All we know is that they have a racial skill line that will presumably have passives, maybe some actives, that type of thing. And we really don't know much about the strength of the passives either. As an MMO, you could say, usually racials are kept pretty insignificant, although that's debatable sometimes, but that should be the goal, that your race doesn't hugely affect your build. But at the same time, the single-player Elder Scrolls games have never been like that, and the developers have recently been saying that ESO will be more single-player, more a test game than an MMO. So, I don't know, it'll be interesting to see what direction they take with that.
Yeah, okay, so for race we've got Dumner. So next thing is class, I guess.
You mentioned CC and you mentioned stealth, and I think that will probably be your decision point. We know the sorcerer is a little CC heavy, or at least that's what we've been told. But at the same time, they're kind of a pet class, and I don't like that, and it usually seems to be annoying as a stealth class. So you don't have to have a pet, but they do have points devoted towards that from their summoning line. So that's something to think about. And then there's the Nightblade, which we don't know much about at all, but I don't think saying that they're going to have specific bonuses to stealth is going to be much of a stretch at all. And a lot of people are, saying they're the rogue class, but at the same time, it's important to remember that all classes in the Elder Scrolls Online are magic users. All of the class abilities consume magicka, they're all spells. So you could absolutely make a caster Nightblade and do just fine with it.
So you said sorcerer's got CC spells, but it's also got summoning.
And who knows as well, the Nightblade may be CC heavy as well. Rogue classes often are.
Yeah, right. I guess we need more details to choose specifically what class. I'm just going to say sorcerer. Let's just go with sorcerer, and maybe for the stealth, perhaps we could put a couple of pieces of medium armor on to boost the stamina, so we've got a bit more stealth potential. What do you think about that?
Exactly. Yeah, I'd get, 3-4 pieces of medium armor. Maybe put a few of your attribute points into stamina. The only concern there is if you're also working on being a caster, that your HP levels might be really low and you won't be able to take many hits. But who knows, if you put enough CC on your bar, that might not be an issue either.
Yeah, it's just a bit of a funny mix actually, going melee DPS with with casting and stealth, because casting and stealth are generally light and medium armor. And if you're in melee range, you probably don't want to be sticking around too long to take damage without some heavy armor. So I'm thinking for melee DPS that I'll be using weapon abilities. So if I'm a sorcerer, I'm getting my spells from my class, and I'm getting my weapon skills from the weapon skill trees themselves. So I'll have a mix on my bar, I imagine, of sorcerer class skills and weapon skills, and possibly some other skills as well.
Basically described exactly how it works. Your class skills are not weapon dependent at all, and you can just fire them off. I know Atropos, the founder of Tamriel Foundry, was saying that when he played at PAX, the sorcerer had a teleport ability that was supposedly tons of fun to use, and I think that could be a really good addition to a melee class that's squishier, and needs to be able to both get in and out. And it would be a really interesting versatile ability if you wanted to play kind of an assassin where you teleported in, or maybe even stealthed in, and then killed someone really fast and then stealthed out or teleported out.
Man, that sounds like so much fun. The next thing for this build, okay, so we've got a dumb-nosed sorcerer with, let's say, 3 pieces of medium armor, and there's another 4 pieces to account for. So I'm thinking, would it be too much of a mix to go maybe 2 pieces of heavy and then 2 pieces of light to make up the 7?
We don't know yet, but I'd say if you're planning to get a lot of use out of your magic, you'll probably want to have quite a few pieces of light armor, as everything's gated by, as I've said, your resource consumption. The spells in this game really are pretty expensive and costly to use, so it would be important to focus on your main damage stat as much as you could.
Okay, so how about this then? So we've got attributes to think about as well, because each time you level up, you get to put points in an attribute. So what if I just load all my attribute points into Magicka? So that gives me the Magicka boost I need. And then from there, with the armor, do you think possibly then I could chuck in a couple of pieces of heavy?
We don't have those details yet, but I will have to say that actually is starting to sound kind of like my melee DPS magical lord. I believe that was exactly what I said, was I'm going to go mostly heavy with some light armor and then just blow my points into magic and hope to hell it works. So I guess we'll find out together.
Okay, maybe I didn't read that far down. I think we've got basically a good idea now of how builds are going to work. Things could change. This is speculation, obviously. But it's informed speculation, so I appreciate your input, and thanks for the article. I found it really helpful. Hopefully people will find this video helpful, the same way I did.
Absolutely, we all hate reading.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to put a link to your article anyway in the video description for those who actually enjoy reading. Do you have any shout-outs you want to make to a guild or anything like that?
I guess. As we said, I'm a staff member on Tamriel Foundry, and we would like to be a great resource for theory crafting and all information ESO in the future. Tamriel Foundry has its own Aldmeri Dominion Guild, Entropy Rising, which you are actually a member of. I myself am not playing a Dirty Elf, though, and am a member of Legend Gaming currently, or Vokendine, and you can find us at legend-gaming.net.
Okay, I'm just going to take a punt and say you're playing Argonian. Is that right?
No, I'm a Nord. I'm pretty much I am at this point pretty much planning to play exactly what I described in that article. We really will be finding out together if that works.
Alright, well, the reason I said possibly Argonian is because your name, Asari, it just sounds a little bit Argonian to me.
I've been using the Asari name for years, which is actually interesting, and then I got into ESO where the double I thing is suddenly lore appropriate, and yeah, so now all types of assumptions can be made.
Alright, man, thanks. Appreciate this.
Thanks for having me.